Well, hey there team, welcome back to the channel and welcome to my overview of Mirror's Edge. So this is more than out of season. This came out back in 2009, and over the years I've often harkened back to it as, one of my favorite games. Especially at that time period, I believe Dead Space came out the same year, or at least an adjacent year, and they were both EA. They both represented a time where, it's kind of popular to dislike AAA nowadays and Electronic Arts, but there were times where they were actually really shooting their shot with unusual, interesting IP, and I kind of celebrate that moment in time in my memory. But the truth of it is, I found on SteamDB, which I kind of use a lot to find games, that there's a randomize button for your library. You should look into it yourself as well. And I hit that, and this is what came up. And that's it, the seed was planted. Bearing in mind that while I owned this on Steam, I hadn't actually played the PC build. I would have played it back on a 360 or whatever back in the day. So yeah, I've just put 2 hours into it, as I do with overviews, being that that's a Steam refund window. And out of curiosity, a mix of pretty heavy nostalgia with not being familiar with the PC build and wanting to see how it holds up. And does it? Well, yes, absolutely. It still works incredibly well. I would argue the problems with it, that there is a bit of jank to the movement, but all of that is ever present in my memory. So what I'm saying is, I don't believe it's janky because of a PC port problem or controller issue or anything like that. It's just inherent in some of the original design, being that it's unusual and it's from, ages past. So yeah, I would actually recommend picking it up and playing it. I think it's worth your time, worth your money. It still holds up to this day. Doing this, well, I'll go through it. If for some reason you've not seen Mirror's Edge before past this, it's like a parkour simulator in a way. Not parkour for the sake of parkour. There's a narrative. They've come up with this weird sort of cyber future where you're kind of part of this organization, these runners, essentially a courier for hire, jumping across skyscrapers and all that. It's a bit of a stretch, but it plays it so straight that it works, which is the best way to do unusual concepts, is when the creator and everyone inside the universe does not even flinch from the concept. Because if you think about it for more than 2 seconds, it's a bit dumb. The two standouts, still to this day, are the fact that, you're doing such an unusual gameplay loop of running and climbing and mantling that still works really well. But also the art direction works really well for me. There's a clean futurism to it, and anytime we come up against anything that looks remotely like this, I celebrate it. It's clearly something personally I enjoy as an art style, but this is probably one of the best, and its use of color in environments is incredibly clever. When you realize a lot of the open world is kind of bland, concrete, white, not quite what I would say brutalist architecture, because there's still sort of a beauty to all the different skyscrapers and buildings. Like, they all kind of have their own distinct design, but the splash of color, and vibrant color at that, to separate out different areas is really cool. It starts with the infamous red paint to show you where to go. This is probably the game that pioneered it, as far as I recall, and it's used heavily as a gameplay mechanic. Nowadays, it's sort of this gimmick that people like to point out, yellow paint on ledges showing you to climb. And while it's overt and arguably a bit on the nose in some games, it's also a bit of a self-report that you're a bit low IQ if you bang the drum about how offensive that is. Not realizing that sort of visual telegraphing throughout gaming has existed for forever, basically. It's more overt in some games than others. So it's always fascinating to me when a YouTuber will make an entire rant about how egregious it is, not realizing that they're sort of falling into the trap of sounding like a bit of an idiot. So yeah, I'm quite smitten with the art design. It's very cool. You get your green themed buildings, your orange themed, your blue, and it's all very visually arresting. As far as the parkour goes, it's very much made for a controller, which, rest in peace, my old Xbox One control, I guess. I must have had that for a decade, and it finally broke, and I tested out the new control on this. And new control, same as old control, whatever, but you definitely want to be playing it with thumbsticks. The main way you control is like left bumper is kind of high state, up, over, jump, and left trigger is slide. dive, under, that sort of thing. I say states because it kind of makes your brain think in that way when you're in the flow state. Reminds me a little bit of the ideas that they floated in the early Assassin's Creeds of, high and low energy state kind of to dictate how your controls work. It's kind of fascinating, that moment in time where they were trying to change the way you see controls. Right bumper's a quick turn, which is very helpful. And then right trigger is combat. And you have a little bit of that. You'll come up against dudes. Honestly, there's a counter timing window, which removes the weapon from them, takes them out of the equation. It's pretty hard not to argue to do it, and it looks cool grabbing the gun and then, stripping it, disarming it. So the combat's very light. It's less combat in the traditional sense of a loop for a game, like a COD or something, and more of just one antagonistic component that's secondary to the core loop. You can also hit B or red, and that will snap your head in the direction of where you want to go. And this is mixed in with, if you're just playing a normal difficulty, fading in red colored parts of the environment to tell you where to go in the flow state. And again, it's less about treating the gamer like an idiot, and it's more about an attempt to organically try and guide the player through environmental coloring. And to be honest, if you sort of embrace it on those terms, less the game's trying to treat me like an idiot and more the game's trying to show me a different way of doing things, keeping you in a linear flow state without really drawing attention to the fact that you're kind of running down a corridor the whole time. It works really well. It's very clever. And there's a few little sort of tricks, like if you hit the ground from a larger height and then you hold the low button, you'll do a roll. If you have to jump over something, maybe it's got barbed wire on the top, or maybe it's just a little bit too tall, you can pull in your legs with the low button, do this little duck crouch dive. You can slide over and under things, and then you can do other stuff like sort of wall run, and then if you hit the quick turn button, the game's smart enough to just turn you 90 degrees, so you can do this wall run, quick turn, jump to sort of ninja jump between two close walls. Anyway, it's supremely satisfying. The story's pretty surface level. It's got some interesting cutscenes done in like an animated art style. I don't particularly love it, but it's cool to see something different, I'll say that. But yeah, it was an absolute treat just playing. It's not like I had a pang to play it or was thinking about it. I literally hit that random button, it came across my desk. I might do that more often, just random reviews of shit in my backlog, because this is really cool. I'm kind of glad that I accidentally forced it into my mind share, then took the time to actually play it, and now I'm sharing it with you. So maybe you haven't thought about it in years as well. Maybe you missed it. Maybe you're younger. You weren't really gaming around that time period. Check it out. It's still really solid, if experimental, and almost difficult to believe that a company as big as, and they were still pretty big back then, as big as EA did this. Anyway, beyond that, I'll be waffling, so I'll finish up there. Mirror's Edge, still wonderful today. Hasn't dropped a single beat, much to my surprise. Anyway, team, I might just leave it there for the time being, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.